today. I'm going to try and share my screen. We can see my screen?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about the sweet potato market preferred varieties and the drivers to enhance adoption of these improved technologies. So the work I will be presenting is a collaborative effort between among various colleagues, and especially colleagues in work package 2 from the co-breeding work package for SweetGAINS, that we have worked closely in all the studies that I'm going to be presenting. We have also benefited a lot from various colleagues from National Agricultural Research Institutes from the 3 countries that these studies are based on, and that is Tanzania, Uganda, and Mozambique. So as I outlined to my presentation, I am going to talk about the rapid assessment studies that we conducted sometime last year. I had presented some of these preliminary results before, but now these are final, and we'll be presenting some key results from here. And especially since these results form some of the basis for other studies that we've conducted that I will also be talking about. We'll also present some findings from a manuscript that we have come up with from these studies, and that is on gender trade preferences and demand for improved sweet potato technologies in Uganda. Lastly, I will talk about some end user acceptance studies that are aimed to assess how we can enhance adoption of improved sweet potato varieties. And part of these studies, we have a choice experiment, risk experiment, and an in-depth gender studies. And currently, these studies are ongoing. We have teams in the field. So as part of the gendered qualitative studies, so we conducted these studies with a focus on Uganda, Tanzania, and Mozambique. Approaches we used is focus group discussions with producers and consumers of sweet potato. And we did this with men and women separately. As you can see on the top side of right side of the screen, we have one FGD there with male producers. I think this was in Mozambique. And on the bottom left with the women producers in the same country. So the methods we used is the 4-cell analysis. Basically, we use this to try and understand the abundance and distribution of various varieties within a community. And from here, we were able to understand the dominant varieties that are planted within each of these communities. And then from there, we used a stepwise elicitation method to understand the traits that are preferable among these preferred varieties. So what I mean by stepwise is first we would elicit the particular traits that are preferred for each of these particular preferred, at least 3 main preferred varieties. And from there, then we do pairwise rankings to come up with a rank of the most preferred traits for each of these preferred traits varieties. So just some of the key results from Uganda. What we can see there, of course, the FGD were disaggregated by women and men. And the key finding here, you can see for the varieties shaded with the, I'm not sure which color it is, this one, but all these varieties are local, varieties. Kazagati, Mulwa, Duduma, and Buduguzo, Mkaire, they are all local varieties. And men, you have the first ranked, the most preferred variety is also local variety, but then we have other improved varieties coming up, the Nasport 8 and 13O, and then a Jumla as the second and third. So then what makes these varieties, to be most preferable? So the key thing to note here is you can see for the agronomic traits, they are all cutting across the local and improved varieties. You have early maturing varieties, the high yielding, drought tolerance, and so on. But again, you market-related traits, you have like big roots, thin, smooth skin, but big roots, you can see it's also cutting across for both local and improved varieties. Then what makes the difference here is because you can see on the organoleptic traits, we have good taste and high dry matter content, which are highly associated with all these local varieties that are highly ranked for both men and women. And I think this is what makes the difference in the preference for the types of varieties here. The improved varieties are said to be missing these particular traits, and that's why, possibly they are not even being ranked by women, and also not highly by men as well. Other traits to look at is you see the ones that have implications on gender roles, like easy to process or peel, and even short cooking times. But if you look at the improved varieties, and one possibility of why these are still being preferred, especially by men, you can see they have vitamin A for both Nasport and Injumla. So still on the same for Tanzania, we have the same story. Local varieties are coming up strong, especially for women, highly ranked Ukimwi Polyster, UKG 16 coming up. There's a Dandrag variety, men as well, all local varieties. And again, the similar story in terms of the agronomic traits that are preferred across these varieties, whether improved or local, and similar for market-related traits, skin color, flesh color, big root, and so on. But again, as we saw in the Uganda case, organoleptic traits also cutting across, and especially across these local varieties, but also for UKG 16 for the improved variety in this case. So again, gender traits with implications for gender roles, you find these mostly for women, easy to peel and good for processing, and so on. So here we do not have the trait with implication for health and nutrition for any variety that has that particular trait. When we go to Mozambique, we have a similar story, except for now, women mostly prefer Amelia, which I believe is an improved variety, but colleagues from Mozambique maybe can come to say something about that. But one thing to note, again, is on the agronomic traits cutting across in terms of high yield, root yield, disease resistance. And disease resistance is coming strongly across all these varieties for Mozambique, and high root yield for that matter. Again, agronomic traits, good taste, and you can see Amelia there, even though, I say to be improved, it has these other traits, but it also has good taste. And in addition, it has vitamin A. And it ranks the highest among women. So I think that could be the reason it makes a difference here compared to the other countries where we saw all local varieties ranking higher than any other improved variety. So just some of the key takeaway messages from this. Agronomic traits, for example, yields and drought tolerance are preferred across men and women. So I think there's no debate that any of these varieties that are being ranked high across the divide, they have inherent agronomic traits that are preferable. And again, organoleptic traits, the good taste and dry matter content are very key and are highly preferred, especially as we saw across women producers and consumers. The take home there is that varieties that have both these agronomic and the organoleptic traits that we've seen, they are the most preferred varieties. And these tend to be local varieties, except for the case of Amelia, as we saw. So again, the improved varieties that we've seen, the difference there again is the nutritional quality, especially with vitamin A. Again, to conclude also, you have other traits that are also important, and especially for women, and these are traits to do with the visual traits, shape of the root, skin and flesh color, or even those with implications for gender roles, like easy to process and cook, and they are also equally important. So what does this mean? I think, to enhance acceptability and even adoption of improved varieties, then, we not only need to consider these gains in agronomic traits like yields, disease tolerance, and drought tolerance, but also key these taste and dry matter content that we've seen are cutting across, and especially making the difference between the preference for local versus improved varieties. Then I'll talk briefly about from these studies, we had also a survey that was being conducted concurrently. And from these two studies, then we've come up with a manuscript. The rationale of this manuscript is to try and understand how preference for certain traits shape the preference for improved or local varieties. And I think this is just, the flip side from the qualitative analysis that we've seen. This is important in the agricultural technology, adoption literature, because it has implications on breeding systems on how to align new varieties with end user demand. The data we use, as I said, is from Uganda, from the focus group discussions with producers and consumers, but also a producer survey. In the methods, we recognize that the preferences for various traits are interrelated. A producer who prefers nutritionally rich varieties, for example, vitamin A, they are also going to consider the organoleptic qualities of this particular variety, whether it is good tasting, whether it has high dry matter content. And on the other hand, you have the market-related traits, also, for example, the flesh color, which are all interrelated. So we recognize this endogeneity in the estimation process due to what we call the multiple linearity problem. We use then the generalized structural equation model, which we can use to correct for this problem in the analysis. Just to show how we model these trait preferences and improved demand. As I mentioned, you have improved variety demand, which is being informed by various traits, agronomic traits, whether it is yield improvement. We have market-related traits, flesh color, skin color, root size. We have quality traits, vitamin A, and then we have the other taste, dry matter content. But again, among these traits themselves, they are also interrelated. Quality traits, vitamin A, is informed by organoleptic traits, taste, dry matter content. In addition, the flesh color comes in to inform this. And also root size and agronomic traits like yield improvement. So this is how we hypothesize this problem. And as I said, we use a generalized structural equation model to model the problem. This just shows, we modeled three interrelated system of equations. The improved variety demand is informed by quality traits, organoleptic traits, market-related traits, and agronomic traits, and control variables like age, gender, and fixed effects like region and the inheritance. Again, quality traits could also be informed by organoleptic traits, market-related traits, and others. And then market-related traits, the same, organoleptic traits and agronomic traits. So this system of three equations, we estimate using the GSM command that is in Stata version 17 to yield the results that are shown on the screen. And what this says is that when we consider our improved variety demand as the dependent variable, vitamin A, preference for quality of vitamin A highly informs this. It is highly positively correlated. So preference for vitamin A is correlated with the demand for improved variety. So producers or consumers who prefer this trait are more likely to, demand for improved varieties. We also saw agronomic traits also. The preferences for this is also positively correlated with the demand for improved variety. And this is intuitive, given the work we do, trying to, improve these gains in agronomic traits in our improved varieties. When we consider nutrition traits as a dependent variable, we see that this is negatively correlated with organoleptic-related traits. And this is no surprise because various literature done by various colleagues also at SIP shows that, improved varieties, especially those OFSP varieties, for example, they score low on organoleptic traits, taste and dry matter content. And this is, as we've seen, also supported by the results from the qualitative studies, the results presented before. So based on this particular aspect, then the question is then, how does organoleptic traits then affect demand for improved variety through the mediating effect of nutrition trait? And this figure is just trying to show that we have organoleptic traits through the mediating effect of nutrition traits or preference for nutritious varieties having a negative, indirect, and total effect on improved variety demand. What this figure just says is that producers, consumers who have high preference for taste and dry matter content, they are less likely to have a demand for our improved varieties. And therefore, key takeaway message, again, preference for agronomic and nutrition traits drive demand for improved varieties. Preferences for organoleptic traits dampen this demand. And instead, there is favor for local varieties, which are said to have these particular traits. So end users is just the mediation effect I talked about. The end users with organoleptic traits are no less interested in nutritious varieties and vice versa. And therefore, to enhance acceptance and uptake of improved varieties, just as we saw in the qualitative studies, we need to consider, in addition to agronomic and nutrition objectives, organoleptic objectives as well. And this is taste, good taste, and dry matter content for sweet potato. So after that, then I just want to talk briefly about the studies that we are currently actually conducting now. We have teams in the field, and this is informed by what the results that we have obtained from the previous studies are presented. So we have a choice experiment whose objective is to try and evaluate the relative importance attached by producers to various traits and the trade-offs thereof. This is in order to guide trade prioritization in breeding efforts. So with the talk to breeders, the question is, then what should we prioritize? You present a suite of preferred traits by both men and women. What should we be able to prioritize in breeding objectives? So this study is aimed in addressing that particular question, whereby we utilize the qualitative study to understand the various attributes or traits, as we saw from those results, and therefore understand the attributes and levels in order to design this experiment. So we carried out a pilot study with 60 producers in Mozambique. I think this was in Manisa, using what we call the blocked fractional factorial design, just to be able to understand the parameters that are attached to each of these attributes. From this, then, we have come up with a Bayesian optimal design with a final study of 900 producers, which we are currently implementing. And again, this is a gendered approach, whereby, of course, this is individual, and the effort is done to ensure we have a good representation of both men and women. This is how the choice experiment design looks like. We have we came up the trick with these choice experiments is to have as few attributes as possible, so that for optimality of the design and the results as well. So we have 6 of these, where we have root size, flesh color, drought tolerance, dry matter content, taste, and vitamin A, and then the additional trait of the seed cost. So again, as I said, with these traits, what the choice of these traits is informed by the qualitative studies, what we saw as being very highly ranked across the study areas, but also with consultations with colleagues from Maputo office. So the levels here we have a mixed design where we have up to 4 levels for some of the traits such as flesh color, taste, and the seed cost, but others have two traits, for example, drought tolerance, it is either drought tolerant or not. Also, dry matter content is either high or low, while others like taste, we have 3 levels. So this is how our choice experiment looks like. So this is just a sample card of the choice that is facing each of these respondents. As you can see, we have the flesh color is the first one. Is it cream or white, or is it orange fleshed? Different combinations of these will yield different, combinations of these various traits. For example, this one has the first option presented is this particular variety has a white color. It has a medium sized root. It is not tolerant to drought. It has high dry matter content. It is medium in sweetness, and it has vitamins. And then the cost there is about 5 Metcash. And then the other option and the third option. So a producer will be evaluating between these 3 and choosing one. But there is also an option of opting out, that I do not prefer any of these particular varieties. So this I just want to show, this is such an exercise that is happening in the field for these choices. So from there then, from this particular exercise, I said, we will be able to analyze and come up with, among all these traits that we've chosen from the qualitative study, how are producers willing to trade one for the other, and therefore be able to prioritize what is the most important. Again, we also, the risk experiment, we are concurrent with the choice experiment. We're also running a risk experiment whose objective is to evaluate the relative role of producer risk profiles and their trade preferences. The technology adoption literature is, full of studies that show, risk preference or aversion to risk, aversion to uncertainty, and how this is related to adoption of technologies. What is missing, and what I think is novel in this particular approach, we try to evaluate the role of these risk profiles and the preference for particular traits, and therefore be able to come up with both recommendations for breeding and seed systems. In this approach, we use incentivized risk games and also use the multiple price list elicitation. The output will have measures of risk and certain aversion, which are also gender disaggregated. And the relevance of this, as I said, is to be able to link segmented risk profiles. We have also an exit survey that is talking about socioeconomic profiles, age, gender, and all that. So those segments, what are the risk profiles for these particular segments, and how do we link this to the preference for certain traits? For example, drought resistance in an uncertain climate, for example, uncertain aversion, how does aversion to uncertainty in an uncertain climate inform preference for drought-resistant varieties, and so on. So this is how the risk experiment looks. And basically, it's very simple, just to try and understand, are you willing to, accept a particular amount of money versus, playing a gamble to win a particular amount of which there's a probability loss, and the probability here is 50-50. To notice that we've tried to simplify this as much as possible in order to be able to explain the probabilities. So depending on which side one chooses, and they choose as going down for each of these particular alternatives, then the point they switch from the gamble or where they play the game to win or lose, to where they really need the certain amount. We call that the certainty equivalent. That's where we can be able to evaluate the various risk profiles, and therefore be able to link this to both the choice experiment results, but also the real adoption of technologies that we are also evaluating from the exit surveys. So this is incentivized to be able to get as close as possible these risk profiles. Lastly, briefly though, we also running an in-depth gender study still in Mozambique, and the choice of this, it was that these studies could have some synergy and therefore maybe minimize on cost. So we're running them concurrently. And the objective of this particular study is to understand trade preferences for sweet potato. And just to mention, we are running this with a consultant who is a gender expert, and we are running this together with her in Mozambique. So the objective is to understand trade preferences for sweet potato, how they are gendered and linked to broader socioeconomic and environmental context. Again, there is the segmentation aspect happening here in terms of socioeconomic and the environmental context, whether it is a high producing region or it is drought kind of prevalent region, and how do these preferences differ. Also understand the mitigating factors that influence adoption from a gender perspective. So the various methods are being used here. We have focus group discussion with elders to try and understand the history. So in the qualitative study I presented before, we are asking currently, what do you prefer? But this one talks about the history in terms of, are there varieties, for example, that have fallen off? Why? In a bit to understand in a wholesome, like, even also the adoption and disadoption process that happens. We also have focus group discussions with sweet potato producers, processors, consumers, men and women separately. We have the interviews, which is using fitness and serious games with couples, and other stakeholders as well. So how is this novel? Why are we doing this? So here we are trying to adapt an innovation systems framework and therefore be able to examine power and gender inequalities and dynamics within the household. As we say, we are playing couple games, trying to see how spouses mediate preferences for certain traits in choosing which varieties to adopt. Then, of course, the use of vignettes or short stories is to identify typologies of household decision-making that are relevant to use of sweet potato varieties. And I think I talked about the trade-off games. We are trying to see how does this compare among couples and explore different priorities, how these are negotiated in different scenarios. Lastly, this is my last slide, is to see just some of the future-related research that could also accompany such studies. Is probably we have done the choice experiments that we've conducted is mainly with producers to understand how they, the traits they prefer, and they rank highly in their production, but they're also consumers in their sense. But we also need to do something with urban consumers, for example. I remember, for example, in the previous presentation, I think it's Margaret mentioned, maybe there's need to do something in Tanzania in this aspect. So this is something that could also happen as a point for future related research. Behavioral nudges towards enhanced adoption is also very coming up strong as one of the key research areas that, in the agricultural sector. And this is some of the studies that can be built up on other studies, for example, one being led by our colleague Julius in Uganda on nudges to adoption of improved varieties, to understand how do we enhance adoption of improved varieties, but also the overall impacts on food and nutritional security and incomes as the ultimate goals. Thank you very much. That's the end of my presentation.
Okay, Chalmers, thanks a lot for your presentation and for delivering on time. You're really bringing a lot of science-based evidence into our discussions, and your work is really shows how social science are really creating evidence for to drive reading programs, working very closely not only with colleagues from the World Package 2, where most of the breeding is done, but also from World Package 4 on seed research. I will keep an eye on the chat so you can focus only on the Q&A session. And Maria, considering the relevance of Chalmers' results for auto breeding efforts, so why don't you lead the way and frame them from a breeding perspective in terms of what do they mean for us, and how are we going to be able just to incorporate them in our sweet potato breeding efforts in Africa going forward? Thank you. So Maria, can you hear us?
I hear you. Thank you, Ubu. Thank you, Chalmers, for this very good presentation. I would like to let you know that I could not go through all the presentation because I came late because I had that Zoom problem. But I managed to follow some. What I would like to say is that, as you all know, from the breeding perspective, what we need, because we know we have been putting in the system a lot of variety. Some of our variety does not have adoption. And indeed, the lack of adoption of these varieties because it does not have all the traits that is needed by the consumers, also by the farmers and also by the processors, which are also restaurants and all that. So from the breeding perspective, so as we need to really understand what the traits that are very important to drive into adoption. In the past in Mozambique, we thought, without the social science interference or study, that what ran adoption in a sweet potato variety was, let's say, it was the dry matter and also the dual purpose sweet potato. If a variety sweet potato had the quality that the consumers could also use the leaves and also has nice dry matter content, which we said it was taste, but nowadays we realize it's much more than that because there is gender aspect and all that, then you say that those varieties could be adopted. But to the presentation of Chalmers, I can see you have those traits like, let's say, the dry, but of course his presentation was mostly around East Africa and Uganda. And you will see, like he mentioned about good level of dry matter content, also drought tolerance, and also these other consumers attribute. Fine. He then also make some correlation between what you will say organoleptic trait, market traits, consumers, agronomic traits, and also nutrition trait. And he mentioned very clear that if between the nutrition trait, but nutrition trait he was very clear when he said it's about the vitamin A. But it's about the vitamin A, and he said there is a negative correlation between these two traits. We all know in the past that dry matter content in most of those our variety was negative correlated to beta carotene content. But it does not mean that through the breeding program, we cannot get a variety which is a good level of dry matter content and also very good trait. So he also mentioned the visual related trait and also talk about how organoleptic traits affect the demand on nutritional traits. And if we see, for example, in his overall conclusion, he mentioned that what really drive adoption are, for example, if I recall it very clear, are the preference for agronomic and nutrition traits drive demand for improved variety. That makes sense. That preference, I think, for organoleptic traits dampen demand for improved variety in favor of local variety. But these are the special case of Uganda and also some case of Mozambique. And I hope when we finalize the study in Mozambique, we come up with something also interested to really say, to really decide that our breeding program, it was worth to be in place. So, so it also mentioned that end users with preference for organoleptic trait are not interested in nutrition variety and vice versa. But if we see, it may be okay, but if you see nowadays where we have, people are much more aware of the nutrition and the value of the sweet potato, orange flesh, the purple flesh, and especially right now that we have the problem of COVID-19, the problem of, let's say, climate, and also the problem of even conflict in Ukraine, people are very much aware of the impact of this on the nutrition. So it's something also that we need to look into it and really try to find out what can be done, because we are in a present situation where all these things has to be put in place. So indeed, one of his conclusions said that to really enhance the acceptance and uptake of improved variety, agronomic and nutrition objectives need to be accompanied by organoleptic traits. This is true. It is true indeed, because at this time we realize the organoleptic component is not only dry matter. It has something we do with the texture, and that's why we are all investing in our laboratory in order to assess this. So our program is much better at the moment because we value the collection of this information, and it is also guiding us on what to really include in this advancement work. On the choice experience, we are doing this choice experience at the moment. It seems very interesting. And the picture that Chalmers shared on the work going on in the field, it was also shared this morning with us. It seems very interesting, but if NICU, it's very interesting work that it is in the field. If NICU also is in this platform, you also can comment, because you're also guiding a lot these people in the field. But I think by the end of the day, I would imagine by the end of June, by June, we should also, our breeding program should be much more empowered than it was ever before. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot, Maria. So, Craig, go ahead. Let's try to keep our interventions brief and to the point so that several other colleagues are able to contribute as well. Lead the way, Craig, please. Thank you.
I agree with you. Chalmers, nice talk. Could you please go to your slides, your initial slides that showed the preferences for the by the consumers, please? The first one I think is fine. Okay, this is really good, but I just want to say here's where we really need some help as breeders. And I'll point out to some of the comments in the chat that have already been mentioned. I think Jim made probably some very pertinent contents, and then God will also. We need a better idea as we move forward. What's good taste? Exactly what's good taste, and like what is high dry matter content? So there's some things, the agronomic traits are traits that we can actually meaningfully measure and breed for. But until you give me something a little bit more definitive, I can't breed for good taste. But if good taste correlates to low glucose and sucrose and high fructose, higher amylase content, which affects texture after cooking, and things of that nature, then I can breed you that. But as we move forward in these culinary trials, we really need to work at quantifying as precisely as we can, and you can do that, what good taste means, because good is different for every different consumer. But you can actually connect those to actual chemical traits and physical traits that you can measure and quantify. And if you can measure and quantify it, then you can start to breed for it. So I would really encourage us to start thinking along those lines. It's what we really need to do. And we have got some great food scientists on board these days that are helping us to develop culinary lexicons that we can use to drive the breeding to make these new varieties that are more market acceptable. I'll stop right there. Just wanted to toss that out for your consideration.
Yes, thanks a lot, Craig, for your very valid point. I think that to some extent we can address your question from building upon results from the RTV food projects, as and Jim has alluded to part of that on the chat. But there are still some other additional aspects where we really need to zoom in order just to be able to make genetic progress. As you mentioned it, unless we're able to measure it properly, we won't be able to make significant genetic progress. So
Let me just follow up real quick. So Chalmers, in your
Yes.
opinion, what consists of a good tasting sweet potato? Just for my own knowledge, please. Or what do farmers think is a good tasting sweet potato?
Well, thank you very much, Craig. I think I wholly agree with your point. Like there is need to, even after identifying that these are critical traits, there is need to kind of come up with a way of measuring what it exactly means. In terms of our, approach, a good taste is, a sweet potato that is not too sweet, medium sweetness. But I agree with you. There is need to know like what does this entail? For purposes of this field work, it was either sweet potato that has low sweetness, it has medium sweetness, and it is very sweet. And most of these consumers would point out that they would prefer a sweet potato that has medium sweetness. And this is part of what is informing the design of our choice experiment. If you may go to the slide.
There you go. Yeah.
That is just pointing like, is it low sweetness? It is a medium sweetness or high sweetness? And this is as much as we could, kind of design this without having, these other studies that are, testing and the diagnostic studies for that matter.
So maybe we could take a couple of those ones that are so-called good, and we can do the chemistry, we can do the storage root chemistry on those. Is good, less than 1.2 mg per gram fresh weight glucose for fructose, but around 3 sucrose. So that would be a really good start, is to dig deeper. What's the actual chemistry of those? And we can begin to infer what actually is good. And then breeders have a target to go for, because we can measure those traits now.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yes, so Robert, sorry for putting you on the spotlight, but based on the HCPC experience in potato, so how it is that you've been able just to reconcile the need to have agronomic traits and quality traits just to ensure the commercial success of your varieties? Could you briefly share your experience with us, please?
Yeah, no problem. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, indeed, we have done quite some what is so-called consumer preference mapping. And what you then learn is, just briefly to say, is that there's no ranking of 1 to 10. So what can be a good taste for one can be a bad taste for the other, and vice versa. So it's not a 1 to 10 ranking. You really need to group people. You can do that with consumer preference mapping, and that tells you what sizes of groups you find in the market. And that you can focus your breeding, your selections on. And you can also do the critical analysis by measurements like Craig mentioned, and you can map those over the consumer preference map. And that tells you the drivers for those groups. Are they low in dry matter or low in sugar or high? Then you get your principal component map over that. Very, very dense with information then, and then you can make choices. But what we also learn is you can have to build it on top of the critical drivers that brings new varieties into your system. So you need to know your critical decision makers, and I don't know, maybe we have tapped onto that and mentioned them in previous meetings, but I don't have them precise for sweet potato in the value chains that we now look at. But if you have anything that is an additional value on taste, it needs to be on top of the arguments that the critical decisions makers in your value chain also need to have improved and want to see improved. It can be yield, it can be agronomics, it can be if it is the middleman that brings it to the market, transport factors. If you can't improve on that, then you can't bring the value that we are now talking about. So so a few words on the learnings, mapping the drivers over the consumer preference mapping, but it needs to be additive on the other traits that are really decision making. If your new variety will be picked up into the value chain or not. Is that okay, Hugo?
Yes, it does a lot, Robert. Thanks a lot. So there are a couple of more questions on the chat. So we will follow up on yours, Julius, later on by written. We haven't really mentioned it, and actually Margaret has addressed it, the one about Polista. So there is a question from GSN. I cannot see the name of that. So his question is, I mean, based on the discrepancy that Chalmers has described between organoleptic and vitamin A traits and agronomic ones. So what are the chances do we have at the moment? So how about, for instance, just promoting new varieties for other value-added products other than cooking? So Chalmers and either Maria or Ruben, what would be your take on that? Briefly, please. Thank you.
I would have let the other colleagues go, but my take would be, I don't know, it's about the market, I think. I mean, the market that we are trying to target. If, you know, which market would be targeting with these, you know, value-added products? You know, is it a higher value market? And that, how do we reconcile this with the key objectives of, you know, targeting the most vulnerable with these varieties that we are releasing? So I don't really have an answer to that in terms of how we should go ahead about it. And then maybe mention colleagues. Ruben, you can come in and comment on this. Sorry for highlighting you, Ruben.
Yes, and in the meantime, so Margaret, based on the work closer to the market end that you and your team have been running in the Tanzania and Uganda. So what's your take on that question? I mean, could you think of other value adding traits other than the cooking quality that we could use just to drive adoption, while we fully address the question being raised on the webinar? Over. Thank you.
And thanks, Hugo. Was that for me, Margaret?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I mean, just to comment on that, while we wait for Maria and Ruben's insight.
Yes, I can.
We've spent many years targeting different types of processors and end users for the OFSP varieties. And so that is the value addition, and that has been done in many countries. But I think the other factor there, when the OFSP varieties are cooked in the same way as the higher dry matter, however we define that, white flesh and cream flesh varieties, they will go mushy. And so it's also increasing awareness that the OFSP varieties need less cooking time, less water, less firewood. They need to be steamed rather than boiled to death. So yes, there's a huge, you know, there's a huge amount of work on value addition, the OFS puree, the baked products at household level, at medium enterprise level, at supermarket level. So that work is going on in different countries. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thanks. So
I'm not sure. Maybe JSN can say who they are so that we can put the question in context.
Let me just make a comment to Ubu. if you see the assessment that was done in Mozambique with looking at gender, it was very clear that the cooking time, it's quite critical for the adoption among those women. But indeed, as you cook these different pipelines like orange, white, and purple, you see that the time that will require to cook some of these different color flesh are quite different. Indeed, they were very clear that when it absorbs a lot of water and all that, they call it's watery, and nobody wants to assess it. So depending, I mean, where is your situation on this dry matter content and all these, you know, and the organoleptic traits and all these biophysical things that goes around, we need to really come up, you understand a lot on the cooking time, understanding a lot on the mealiness, because they also mention hardness, they mention mealiness in order to really get the variety adopted. But those organoleptic property are quite critical, if I can say. I leave the rest for God will, and also Ruben to make a comment in their own perspective. But
okay, thank you. But in the
indeed,
meantime, and while GSN identifies himself, herself, so Bonnie has a comment. Go ahead, Bonnie, please.
Yeah, thank you, Hugo, and thank you, Chalmers, for that presentation. So I just want to comment about the traits that the farmers normally prefer and what drives the adoption of these improved varieties. So when this study was carried out in Uganda, I was part of the team that carried out the study under Workpack 4. We noticed that most of the traits that are preferred had characteristics or characters that are particular, and they were only in the local varieties that are not released. So what we did, we went into the catalog of all the released varieties in Uganda, and we identified varieties that we considered best fits to those varieties that were preferred, the local land races, and we identified them. And what we did is we took them out and then planted them out in demonstration plots, and then farmers were actually able to harvest them and also to cook and to eat. And what they actually told us that they preferred the varieties that are released over the ones that are local, the ones that they were considering local. And the reason, I think, the reason they preferred the released ones is because they had exactly that some of the tastes that they were interested in. Now that just showed that the released varieties, that farmers do not have access to all the varieties that are released, because one of the released varieties that have actually been adopted in the region in which the study was conducted is Tanzania. And this variety is a 1995 release, over 20 years ago. And these farmers are just receiving it for the first time. And when they received it, they liked it so much, and they preferred it over their local land races that they were producing. So this just shows that adoption, that there are varieties that we have produced that are actually good, but the problem is that the farmers do not have access to them. So how do we bridge this gap between releasing varieties and making them available to the farmers? Because the only released varieties that they had in this study, if you can observe, is that they were all orange fresh varieties. And yet there are also varieties that are cream fleshed and white fleshed that have been released. And the farmers brought about the importance of having a mechanism of making released varieties available to the farmers. Thank you, in order to increase their adoption. So thanks, that's the comment I wanted to make.
Okay, Bonnie, thanks. So we really want to finish at the hour. So we heard already from Robert. So Jim or Sandra, would you have any any final comment for us, not only to think about, but to act on it before we finish this webinar? If so, go ahead, please. It doesn't look like
Sounds like we lost them.
yes, we might have lost them already. Yes. Okay, so Craig, just to finish up, is yours a legacy hand, or do you want anything else briefly?
No, I think this is a great seminar, and I think Chalmers, you started off really well with some thought-provoking things and some, you're kind of pointing the direction on where we need to go for more consumer acceptance. So I want to thank you very much.
Yes, Sam, from here, I would like just to echo your thoughts. Starting this seminar webinar with this one, I think that it's the right way to do it, because it's really forcing us to think the way that we do the breeding, and based on this insight, we can somehow tailor not only the upcoming webinars, but also our work. So with that, I would like to thank everybody for your participation and for the question, and particularly to Chalmers for giving the inaugural webinar. And we will be sharing the presentation with all of you. So with that, thanks a lot. Have a good day and stay in touch. Bye there.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye there.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.